Hello people, welcome back to Chess with Pawns, where we play chess, analyze chess, and learn chess together. Today we are going to go over the beginner's guide of learning chess. This is for everybody who finds chess intimidating, confusing. It's not a hard game as long as you understand the basics, and that is what we are going over today. So the five basics: board and piece setup, piece moves, special piece moves, checks, and then obviously how to win the game and not lose. Okay, well, obviously first we're going to go over the board and what does the board mean. So there's 64 squares on the board, 8 by 8. So going up and down, this is the files, and then going across, this is the ranks. They are all lettered and numbered depending on what square. So this would be A1 right here, A2, A3, and so on and so on. When setting up the chessboard, whether it's online, it's going to be set up for you, obviously, or if you're playing in person, it is very important if you're playing in person that the white square is to the right of you at the bottom of each player. Okay, next we're going to talk about piece setup. So these guys here at the bottom are called pawns. Okay, pawns go on the second rank all the way across. Okay, next is going to be our rook. These go at the bottom rank at the end of the board. Next piece to come in is our knight. That's the piece that looks like a horse that goes right next to your rook. Next piece to come in is our bishop. Bishops are next to the knight. So next piece to come in is our queen. Remember, queen always goes on its color. So we have a white queen here. It goes on the white square. And then finally we bring in our king. It goes right next to the bishop and the queen. Okay? And it is the same for black. Notice that this queen is a black queen, so it's on its black square. All right, so now that we got the board, we understand the board and the piece setup, it's time to talk about how these pieces move. This is the exciting part. This is what everybody is waiting for. So these are the pawns. So I got pawns set up on both sides. White in chess always goes first, okay? Pawns are allowed to move in a weird way. It's kind of the most complicated piece. Once you get to learn it, it's very simple. So the first move of a pawn can do two things. It can move up one square or it can move up two squares, but only the first move. After that first move, the pawn can only move up one square at a time. Pawns attack other pieces diagonally only. That's how pawns attack pieces. So here's an example how pawns move. So I'm going to move this e pawn to e4. Remember, the first time I move the pawn, I can move it 2 squares. My opponent will move their pawn to e6, just choosing to move the pawn 1 square, which is fine. I will then move my d pawn to d3, choosing to move my pawn 1 square. My opponent will move their pawn 2 squares to f5. Now, I'm able to capture this pawn diagonally. That's how pawns capture, which we will do. Now my opponent can now capture my pawn diagonally. They choose to move 1 square forward to e5. They can't go 2 squares if they move the pawn already. I will move my pawn to d4. My opponent will attack the d4 pawn. Next, we're going to talk about the rook. The rook can move horizontally straight across or vertically straight across. So it looks something like this. A rook can move in this way. Okay? A rook can capture if a piece is in a rook's way, meaning if the pawn is on a6, this rook can capture the pawn. Take. If a rook is on g1, this rook can then attack that rook, like so. When you attack a piece, that piece stops. Now let's talk about our bishops. Each side of the board has two bishops on their own colored square. For example, white has a dark squared bishop and a light squared bishop. Black has a dark squared bishop and a white squared bishop. These bishops move diagonally on their color, meaning the dark squared bishop for white can only move diagonally across on the dark squares. Same is said for the white squared bishop on white. It can only move diagonally across the white squares. So depending on where the bishop is in the game, it can see more squares, which has more control over the board. Just like the rook, the bishop can attack as well. If our white squared bishop, if our black's white squared bishop was on f5 and it was white to move, white can then attack diagonally on the white square to attack that bishop and capture. Now we have the knight. The knight can jump to different squares. It doesn't necessarily slide to different squares. What I mean by that, the knight moves in an L pattern, okay? 1, 2 over, and 1 up or down. It looks something like this. This is how the knight moves. A knight can be a very dangerous piece. It is a very tricky piece. Catches opponents off guard through forks. This particular knight in this position covers 8 different squares. Another special thing about the knight is that it can jump over other pieces. In this particular position, this knight wants to attack the e7 pawn, but there's pieces in the way. Simply the knight can jump over and attack that pawn to capture. And now the queen. The queen is the most valued piece in chess because of how it moves. And each side only has one queen. So I want you guys to think back to the rook and the bishop. That's exactly how the queen moves. Up and down, left and right, and on a diagonal. A queen can be very powerful when the board is open. It sees a lot of different squares and has a lot of different moves it can do. It does not copy the knight. That's the only pattern the queen cannot move. The queen captures just like a bishop or a rook, diagonally or vertically or horizontally. Now we have the king. The king can only move one square at a time in any direction. The queen can move here, 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 and here. These are the only moves in this position the king can make. The king can also attack in any direction. In this position, I can attack this pawn, this pawn, this pawn, or just move back. Whatever I like. We will take the e5 pawn. Okay, now that we know how the pieces move, we will talk about a few special moves. It's nothing crazy that you guys have to absolutely remember, but it's good to know. So we're going to talk about the en passant. En passant is a French term which means in passing. So I want you to look at this position. My pawn is currently on e5. My opponent's other pawn is on e6. It is currently black to move. If they take their f7 pawn and move it to f5, it does not give my e5 pawn an opportunity to take. Only in this instance are you able to perform en passant. opponent goes f5, passing my e5 pawn. Only on this turn am I able to perform en passant, where I attack this direction to capture the f5 pawn. I will start the board over to show you what this looks like. e4, opponent plays e6. I advance my pawn to e5. Opponent wants to pass my pawn, I en passant. The next special rule you need to know is the castling of the king. Castling of the king really helps so you can protect your king from your opponent's pieces. There's two ways you can castle the king. So in this position here, it is white to move. I'm able to move my king from E1 to G1. Now this is moving the king 2 spaces. We talked about before the king can only move 1 space. Only in this instance can the king move 2 spaces. So what it does is it flips the king and the rook as so. Now you can do this on both sides of the board. So this castling the king this particular way is called the king side castle. Castling the king this particular way, where the king goes to C1 and the rook goes to D1, is called the queen side castle. That is castling the king. There are a couple rules to remember when it comes to castling. I want you to look at this position. White wants to castle king side. Bring the king to G1 and the rook to F1. White cannot do this because you cannot castle through a check. Bishop owns F1 square on the diagonal. The king cannot go through a check during castle. Another thing to remember is you cannot castle if you have once moved your king. So if I move king to D2 and then move king back to E1, I am no longer, even though the bishop is blocked by the pawn, I am no longer able to castle. Those are the 2 rules of castling. Now we will talk about checks. Checks is when a piece is attacking the opponent's king. So this rook is attacking my king. So I need to get the king to safety. There are 3 different ways you can get out of check. You can simply move the king out of check, protecting the king. You can block the check with another piece, protecting the king. Or you can take the piece that has the king in check, and I am no longer in check. You are not allowed to move until your king is out of check. Now we'll go over how you win the game. The game is won through a checkmate. It's when your king is attacked and no pieces can block the check. The king cannot retreat from the check, and the piece that is giving the king the check cannot be captured. It is then called checkmate. In this position here, black has a queen on G8 covering the G file. It is black's move. The black moves castle to H7, putting the king in check, mate. The king cannot move here, 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 or here to escape from the check, nor do I have any pieces to block the check, and I cannot capture the piece that puts me in check. This causes white to lose through checkmate. The last thing we got to talk about is the stalemate, or the draw in chess. There's not always a winner and a loser in chess. Sometimes there's a draw. It's called the stalemate. So in this particular position, as you can see, it is white to move. White king cannot move to any squares. It is all protected by the king and the queen. But it's my turn to move. Since I have no square to go to because I would be in check and the queen will capture, it is technically a stalemate. And that's all there is to it, guys. It's a pretty simple game. It's the more you play, the more you understand how the pieces move. You're not going to get it right away. Once you start understanding it and you play more, you will see that you enjoy the game. You'll start seeing the tactics. You'll start learning the openings. You'll start winning games. And once you start winning games, you'll see chess is an awesome game, and that's why it's been around for centuries. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something. Please hit subscribe if you enjoyed this video, but we'll see you next time.